Hello. General Hospital spoilers will reveal, after completing her mission to shut down the electrical grid on Spoon Island, as instructed by Jack Brennan, Josslyn had no idea she was walking directly into a lethal trap. Collums, a powerful figure in the criminal underworld, had secretly ordered a hit on Josslyn. The plan was to silence her permanently before she could expose the dangerous truths she was unknowingly stumbling. His motives were clear: he had too much to lose. And Josslyn's curiosity had started to uncover things that could unravel his carefully constructed empire, unbeknownst to her as she executed the task that Brennan had assigned. The consequences of her actions were already being set in motion. Josslyn, driven by her determination to follow through, hadn't yet realized how deeply entangled she was in a web of manipulation. She thought the mission was simple enough, a task to disable the grid for an undisclosed reason. But it was much more than that. Collums had been watching her closely, and the minute she set foot on Spoon Island to carry out the job, she became a target in a much bigger game. Back in Port Charles, Brick, a trusted ally of Sonny Corinthos, and someone Josslyn had always considered a friend, began to notice something unsettling in her behavior. Though Josslyn had always been the type to keep her cards close to her chest, this time there was something different. Brick, with his finely tuned instincts and deep concern for Josslyn's well-being, saw the cracks in her facade. He noticed how she was unusually secretive, and her behavior became increasingly erratic. It wasn't like Josslyn to act so guarded, especially around him. She had always been open even when dealing with dangerous situations in the past, but now, it was as though she was hiding something, and he couldn't ignore the growing unease in his gut. As he dug deeper into her recent activities, Brick stumbled upon something that made his heart race with concern. Josslyn had been inquiring about how to disable the power on Spoon Island, a curious and unusual question to come from her, especially given her age and the fact that she wasn't involved in anything that would require such knowledge. She had passed it off as a simple school assignment, but Brick wasn't buying it. His suspicions grew stronger. What could she possibly need to know about the electrical grid on a remote island unless there was something much bigger at play, something that threatened more than just the island's power supply, something far more dangerous? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Brick made the decision to investigate. His concern for Josslyn had now turned into a full-blown obsession. He began following her movements more closely, trying to piece together the puzzle. His deep connections within the criminal world allowed him to gather information that others might overlook. As he quietly uncovered more details, he learned of Collums' involvement in orchestrating an elaborate scheme to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to his empire, and Josslyn, though unknowingly, had become one of those threats. Brick's investigation revealed a chilling truth. Collums had already set things in motion. He had hired a hitman, a detective skilled in both surveillance and assassination, and instructed him to take out Josslyn once she became a liability. It was all part of a larger strategy to protect his secrets and preserve his hold on power. Collums had underestimated Josslyn's tenacity, but once she began to pry into the wrong areas, it became a matter of life and death for him. He couldn't risk letting her connect the dots. The more Brick uncovered, the clearer it became. Josslyn's life was in imminent danger. Brick, having learned the full extent of the threat, immediately set out to protect her, but he was running against the clock. The hitman was already on his way, and Josslyn had no idea what was coming for her. With his own skills in the underworld, Brick knew he had to act fast. He couldn't let her face this alone. His loyalty to Sonny and to Josslyn pushed him into action, and he made it his mission to stop the impending assassination before it was too late. As for Josslyn, she began to feel the weight of the danger creeping closer. The more she reflected on her actions, the more she realized how far she had fallen into a dangerous game that was never meant for her to play. The fear gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that every step she took was being carefully calculated by someone she couldn't even see. Desperation set in as she realized the full scope of what was happening. She had unknowingly stepped into a world where her life no longer held the same value. Collums would do whatever it took to keep his secrets hidden, even if that meant eliminating her. It was in these moments of dread that Josslyn felt the cold grip of fear tightening around her chest. She couldn't run, she couldn't hide. The danger had already followed her back to Port Charles. Knowing that Collums had orchestrated this plan, knowing that she had become a pawn in a much larger scheme, made her question everything she thought she knew. Could she trust anyone? How could she survive in a world that had turned so dark so quickly as the trap closed in? Brick knew the clock was ticking. He couldn't waste time. He had to find Josslyn before the hitman did. Every second counted, and as he gathered his resources, he vowed to do whatever it took to keep her safe. But could he stop a killing that was already in motion, or would Josslyn's involvement with Brennan and Collums prove to be the fatal mistake that sealed her fate? The stakes were higher than ever, and the only thing Brick knew for sure was that he couldn't let Josslyn become another victim of the dark underworld she had unwittingly stepped into. As the truth about the plot to assassinate her slowly came into focus, Josslyn's world began to unravel. The reality of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. The once safe and predictable life she had known was now nothing more than a fragile illusion. The revelation that Collums had ordered a hit on her, the very man she'd once believed was beyond reproach, sent a chill down her spine. She was no longer just a pawn in his game, she was the target of a deadly conspiracy. In the wake of this terrifying discovery, Josslyn turned to Brick, her last hope for survival. Desperation and fear twisted her heart as she begged him not to reveal what he had uncovered. She knew that exposing the truth would only escalate things, making them far worse than they already were. Josslyn had seen the ruthlessness that Collums was capable of, and now more than ever, she understood that he would stop at nothing to protect his empire. Collums was not a man who would forgive, and that realization terrified her to her core. She knew that even the smallest slip-up, the faintest hint of her knowledge, could cost her everything. Her life was no longer in her control. It was dangling by the thinnest of threads, and with every passing second, that thread grew weaker. Her voice, filled with raw emotion, trembled as she pleaded with Brick. She tried to convince him that revealing the truth wouldn't just put her life in danger, it would lead to the destruction of everyone she cared about. She could already feel the weight of the impending doom pressing down on her. She was trapped, caught in a web of fear, guilt, and helplessness with no way out. She didn't want to drag Brick into this mess, but she was running out of options. The feeling of being cornered, of being trapped with nowhere to turn was overwhelming. It gnawed at her day and night, leaving her unable to think clearly, only consumed by the fear of what Collums would do if he found out she knew too much. But despite Josslyn's pleas, Brick couldn't simply stand by and do nothing. His loyalty to Sunny and his deep affection for Josslyn pushed him to act. He couldn't remain silent in the face of such an imminent threat. His role in Sunny's world of organized crime had taught him the harsh realities of power, betrayal, and violence. But it had also forged in him a strong sense of duty. Josslyn was not just a casual acquaintance. She was someone he cared about deeply. He couldn't let her face this alone, not when he had the power to stop it. So Brick made a difficult decision to go against Josslyn's wishes. He couldn't risk losing her because of a secret that was too dangerous to keep. He began working in the shadows, quietly digging for more information, trying to piece together the puzzle Collums had set in motion. Every step had to be calculated, every move had to be precise. Brick knew that one misstep could spell disaster, not just for him, but for Josslyn as well. The consequences of failure were too high, and the risks too great. He couldn't afford to be reckless, but at the same time, he couldn't afford to wait too long. Time was running out, and Collums was getting closer to making his final move. Meanwhile, Josslyn's anxiety grew exponentially with each passing day. The sense of dread she felt deep in her gut only intensified as the danger closed in. The realization that she was being hunted by someone as calculating and dangerous as Collums was more than she could handle. She was no longer in control of her fate. Her life had become a fragile, precarious thing that could be snuffed out at any moment. Her once confident demeanor had shattered, replaced by a constant undercurrent of fear. The world she knew was crumbling around her, and she was helpless to stop it. The tension in her mind was unbearable. She couldn't shake the feeling that her every move was being watched, that someone was lurking in the shadows, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The fear consumed her, clouding her judgment and making it nearly impossible to think clearly. She was constantly on edge, always looking over her shoulder, terrified that today could be the day she didn't survive. Josslyn and Brick, working in tandem, but with the heavy weight of fear looming over them both, knew that they had to face Collums' deadly plot head-on. It wasn't just about saving her life anymore, it was about survival against a ruthless force that threatened to destroy everything she had ever known. As the days passed, their resolve grew stronger. They both understood that this was no longer a simple battle to escape a dangerous criminal. It was a fight for their very lives, and there could be no mistakes. Collums wasn't a man who left things to chance. He had orchestrated the perfect trap, and they had to figure out how to dismantle it without falling into it themselves. Every decision had to be weighed carefully. Each action they took, no matter how small, could tip the balance between life and death. As Josslyn and Brick moved closer to confronting Collums, the stakes became higher. There could be no second chances. The tension between them was palpable. Brick knew that his loyalty to Sunny and his desire to protect Josslyn were in direct conflict with the dangers of their world. The closer they got to uncovering Collums' plans, the more the threat to both of their lives escalated. They had to work quickly, but also cautiously. One slip-up, one wrong move, and it could all be over. But in the back of both their minds, there was an unsettling truth. Collums was no ordinary enemy. He was calculating, methodical, and ruthless. The more they uncovered, the more they realized just how dangerous it was to challenge him. The fight for survival had become a battle against a force much bigger than either of them, and the consequences of failure were too great to comprehend. Josslyn, despite her best efforts to keep the truth hidden, understood one painful reality without Brick by her side. She wouldn't survive this. The stakes had escalated far beyond her control. Every passing day made her more acutely aware of how perilous her situation had become. Each moment was heavy with the weight of impending danger, and with each tick of the clock, her anxiety deepened. Collums' web of manipulation was closing in, and she was trapped in the heart of it, unable to break free. The thought of facing this alone terrified her. But despite her desperate situation, there was one constant she could rely on Brick. In her heart, Josslyn knew that without Brick's involvement, she was as good as dead. He was the only one who could see through the darkness and navigate the treacherous path that lay ahead. His loyalty, his instincts, and his capacity to protect those he cared about made him the only person she could trust in a world where betrayal lurked at every corner. She felt herself spiraling into a place of isolation, unable to share her burden with anyone else. But even as the tension built within her, knowing that Brick was working tirelessly behind the scenes, unraveling the truth about Collums was the one thing that kept her going. Every day the pressure of the situation mounted. Josslyn's heart raced with every noise, every glance, every movement that seemed out of place. She found herself constantly scanning her surroundings, paranoid that Collums' men might be watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The paranoia had begun to consume her, gnawing away at her resolve, leaving her feeling trapped in an inescapable nightmare. She couldn't afford to make a single mistake, and the weight of that realization was suffocating. But through it all, she clung to the one shred of hope that remained, Brick. He was her lifeline, the one person who knew the truth and was willing to fight for her survival. As Brick continued to gather information, he became more deeply entrenched in the dangerous game Collums had orchestrated. His every move was calculated with precision, knowing that one wrong step could have fatal consequences. Brick's focus was unyielding, driven by his desire to protect Josslyn, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. He understood the stakes better than anyone. He knew that Collums was not a man who could be reasoned with, and he knew that confronting him head-on would require all of Brick's resources and cunning. Yet despite the risks, Brick pressed forward, unwilling to back down. But the more Brick uncovered about Collums' machinations, the more he realized the depth of the danger Josslyn was in. It wasn't just about silencing her anymore, it was about covering up a web of lies, secrets, and power plays that stretched far beyond what she had initially uncovered. Every move Collums made was part of a larger plan to protect himself and eliminate anyone who posed a threat. Josslyn had unknowingly become a critical piece in a game far bigger than herself. And as Brick delved deeper into the plot, he realized just how high the stakes had become. The tension between Josslyn and Brick grew as they navigated the dangerous waters of Collums' world. Josslyn could feel the weight of Brick's unspoken determination and the unrelenting pressure of their shared struggle. She knew that Brick was doing everything he could to save her, but deep down she feared it might not be enough. The game had already gone too far, and Collums had covered his tracks too thoroughly. The closer they got to exposing the truth, the more dangerous the situation became. Every step forward brought them closer to the edge of a precipice, and the potential for disaster loomed larger with every passing day.